I'm Sarah, 42 years old, and I've been part of my husband Michael's family for over a decade. It's the kind of family where holiday dinners are big, loud, and crowded. 3 generations crammed around one long table, the smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie floating through the air. This year, I was determined to make it a good one for my daughter, Lily. She's 12, quiet, and thoughtful. The kind of kid who notices everything but doesn't always say what she's feeling. She's been looking forward to Thanksgiving for weeks, talking about grandma's stuffing and asking if she could help bake the pies. I thought, maybe, this year would have a drama-free holiday. That hope lasted until dessert plates were cleared and my mother-in-law, Carol, stood up with a grin. "All right, everyone," she announced, her voice cutting through the chatter. "I have something special for my grandkids this year." The room instantly buzzed with curiosity. Carol reached under the sideboard and pulled out a neat stack of glossy white boxes, each one wrapped with a shiny red bow. I recognized the packaging immediately. iPhone 16 Pro Maximum. The newest model, the kind of thing every teenager had been talking about. A ripple of excitement spread through the table as she started handing them out. "One for Josh," she said, placing a box in her eldest grandson's hands. "One for Emily." Another went to her twin granddaughters. One for little Mason. Each child lit up like a Christmas tree, peeling off boughs and running their fingers over the sleek boxes. Lily's eyes widened, and I saw her sit up straighter. She smoothed her sweater, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, trying to look calm. She's been saving up for a phone for months, doing extra chores, counting coins in a jar in her bedroom. I knew, without her saying, that she hoped this might be the moment she finally had one of her own. But the moment never came. Carol kept passing out boxes until her hands were empty. Then she sat down, sipping her wine as though nothing was amiss. Lily glanced at the spot in front of her, bare tablecloth. The smile on her face faltered. She didn't say anything, just pressed her lips together, her hands folding neatly in her lap. I felt my chest tighten. I tried to give Carol the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she'd made a mistake, left Lily's gift somewhere else. But then Carol leaned back in her chair, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, she's not blood," she said matter-of-factly, gesturing toward my daughter. I figured it wouldn't make sense. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. The laughter died instantly. Fox froze mid-air. No one looked directly at me, but I could feel the collective discomfort. Lily's eyes dropped to her lap, her cheeks turning a shade pinker. She didn't cry. My girl's strong, but I could see her blinking a little faster, the way she does when she's holding back tears. Inside, I was boiling. My fingers dug into my napkin under the table. I wanted to call Carol out right then and there, but something in me knew that exploding in front of the entire family might make things worse for Lily. So I swallowed my anger, feeling it burn in my throat. Someone cleared their throat. Michael's sister reached for the cranberry sauce, pretending to be busy. The only sound was the faint clink of silverware against china. Even the kids who had just been laughing over their new phones sat quietly now, glancing between Lily and their grandmother. I reached for my daughter's hand under the table. She gave me a quick squeeze back, a silent "I'm okay," but I knew she wasn't. She never expected to get an iPhone today, but to be told, so plainly, that she didn't belong? That was a wound deeper than any gift could fix. To break the tension, my brother-in-law tried to crack a joke about the turkey being too dry. A couple of people chuckled politely, but the mood was broken. I took a sip of my water, forcing my voice to sound normal when I asked Lily if she wanted more mashed potatoes. She shook her head. For the rest of the meal, I could barely taste the food. My mind kept replaying the moment Carol's words landed. How casual, how unbothered she looked, as if she hadn't just driven a knife into the heart of a 12-year-old girl. I remember the first time I met her, years ago, when she shook my hand and smiled. She had seemed warm then, but over the years, small comments had slipped through, remarks about Lily's different features, questions about her real father. I brushed them off, convincing myself they weren't meant to be cruel. But this wasn't subtle. This was deliberate. Lily sat quietly through the rest of dinner, poking at her green beans, answering questions with short, polite sentences. I tried to keep the conversation moving, asking about Wyke, the weather, the football game on TV, anything to distract from the tension that had settled over the table like a heavy blanket. When the pumpkin pie came out, Carol was laughing again, telling a story about how church bake sale. Her voice rang loud, but every time I glanced around, I saw relatives still stealing quick, uneasy looks toward Lily. It was as if everyone knew what had happened was wrong, but no one was willing to speak up. I kept my composure, smiling when spoken to, but inside, I was already planning my next move. Not a petty comeback. Not an argument in front of the kids. Something measured. Something that would make it clear that you don't get to insult my child in my home, or under my roof, and walk away without consequences. Still, I stayed seated until the last coffee cup was cleared, my hand resting on Lily's shoulder. She stayed close to me, her small frame leaning ever so slightly into my side. We didn't talk about it yet. There would be time later. But in that moment, with the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen and the faint chatter of cousins in the living room, I made myself a promise. This was the last Thanksgiving where Lily would sit at a table and be treated like she was less. The very last. The after-dinner unease. The moment the last coffee cup clinked onto its saucer, Lily quietly slipped her hand from under mine. She pushed her chair back so softly the legs barely scraped the hardwood floor. "May I be excused?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I gave her a small nod, and she disappeared down the hallway toward the guest bedroom we'd prepared for her earlier to rest if she got tired. The hum of conversation around the table had shifted since earlier. It was no longer light-hearted chatter but a murmur of half-hearted small talk. My sister-in-law passed the whipped cream to her husband without meeting my eyes. Michael's cousin chuckled at something on his phone, but it felt forced, like a laugh for the sake of filling the quiet. I felt the weight of eyes flicking toward me and then away again. Quick, guilty glances that said, "We saw what happened, but we're not getting involved." It was like a silent agreement had spread across the table, to pretend nothing had happened, even though it hung over us like smoke after a candle's been blown out. Michael sat to my left, his fork tracing laser circles in the leftover gravy on his plate. I leaned slightly toward him. "You're just going to let that go?" I whispered, keeping my tone calm. He shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "Not hey, Sarah," he murmured, still looking at his plate. "Not hey." I repeated softly, my voice laced with disbelief. I wasn't looking for a public scene, but the fact that he couldn't even acknowledge it in the moment stung. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, a nervous habit I knew well. It was his tell. He was uncomfortable and didn't want to talk. He reached for his water glass instead of looking at me, as if hydration could wash away what had just happened. Meanwhile, Carol was in her element again, leaning toward her other son, telling him about the new coffee shop that had opened near her house. Her voice was bright, her smile practiced, her tone carrying the kind of ease only someone unbothered could have. I felt the shift in the room physically, like someone had turned the thermostat down a few degrees. Conversations sputtered out quicker than they started. A few of the kids had left the table entirely, running toward the living room where the football game was playing. The adults who stayed seemed to be speaking in quieter voices, eyes darting toward me, then quickly focusing on something else. I stood and began gathering plates, partly to busy my hands and partly because the motion gave me an excuse to move around, to observe. As I collected the dinnerware from Michael's aunt, she gave me a small, almost apologetic smile, one that said she sympathized but wouldn't say it out loud. In the kitchen, I set the plates in the sink and let the faucet run just to hear something other than the strained murmur from the dining room. The scent of turkey and cinnamon still lingered, but now it felt cloying, heavy. When I stepped back into the doorway, Michael was leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his gaze somewhere far away. I decided to try again. "Michael," I said quietly, "we can't just let her." He cut me off without looking at me. "Sarah, later." His tone was firmer this time, almost final, as though speaking about it now would somehow ruin the last threads of civility holding the evening together. I clenched my jaw but said nothing. My eyes swept the table again. The room felt split into two groups, those trying to continue the evening as though nothing had happened and those who were simply waiting for the night to end. Carol laughed at something one of the grandkids said in the living room, a light, airy laugh that grated against my ears. I could hear Lily's absence in that moment. Her voice wasn't among the others. I excused myself from the table without an announcement and walked quietly down the hall toward the guest bedroom. The light was off, but when I cracked the door open, I saw her curled up on top of the covers, scrolling aimlessly on her tablet. She looked up at me and forced a small smile, the kind kids use when they are trying not to worry you. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked gently. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But her eyes darted away, and I knew the weight of the evening was still pressing on her. I didn't push her. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. "I'm right here," I said softly. "No matter what." She nodded, and I squeezed her hand before standing. Back in the dining room, the atmosphere had settled into something quieter, almost lethargic. People were finishing their drinks, stacking dessert plates. Michael was still in his chair, scrolling through his phone now, a sure sign he was trying to mentally escape the tension. I poured myself a small cup of coffee, letting the steam warm my face. From across the table, I caught Carol's eye for a brief moment. She held my gaze just long enough for the corner of her mouth to twitch into something that might have been a smake, or maybe I was imagining it. Either way, it was enough to reignite the simmer in my chest. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. I wasn't going to let this moment turn into an uncontrolled scene. But the decision was already forming in my mind, one I knew I'd carry out when the time was right. Michael finally looked up from his phone and gave me a faint, uneasy smile. "You okay?" he asked, the question sounding more like a placeholder than genuine concern. "I'm fine," I said, my voice even. "But we're going to talk about this." He didn't respond, just nodded once and went back to scrolling. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen signaled that a few of the aunts had decided to start cleanup. Chairs scraped against the floor as people slowly began excusing themselves. Goodbyes were quieter than usual, hugs a little more awkward. The joy that normally lingered after Thanksgiving had been replaced with something else. Something that made me certain this night would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. I stayed calm, outwardly polite, even as my thoughts ran ahead of me. I wasn't the type to plot revenge over petty slights, but this wasn't petty. This was about my daughter's place in this family. And while I wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of a public blow-up, I knew exactly what had to happen next. I just wasn't going to do it here. Not tonight. The last of the cars had pulled away, the tail lights vanishing down the dark street. Inside, the house felt strangely hollow, the kind of quiet that makes every sound seem louder than it should be. I stood in the living room for a moment, listening to the faint clink of dishes from the kitchen. Michael hadn't said much during the goodbyes, just polite smiles and quick nods. Now, I knew exactly where he'd gone. I followed the low hum of running water and found him at the sink, sleeves rolled up, methodically rinsing plates. The fluorescent light above the counter washed his face in a cold glow. He didn't look up when I stepped into the doorway. "Michael," I began, my voice low but unshakable, "we need to talk about what happened tonight." He set a plate on the rack, still not meeting my eyes. "Sarah, it's late." "No," I cut in, stepping closer. "We're not pretending this didn't happen. I need to understand why your mother thinks it's acceptable to speak to my daughter that way." His hand stilled under the stream of water. For a long moment, the only sound was the faucet. Finally, he exhaled and turned to face me, his expression tight. "She's been saying things to me for a while," he admitted. I folded my arms. "What kind of things?" He hesitated, his jaw working. "She doesn't see Lily as part of me. She thinks," he glanced toward the doorway as if checking for shadows. "She thinks if we ever have a child together, That should be my focus, not someone else's kid. I stared at him, stunned. Someone else's kid? That's how she sees her? That's how you see her? Of course not, he said quickly, stepping forward. You know I love her. But Mom, she's old-fashioned. She's been on me about real children for months now. The words hit like stones in my chest. Real children, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of them. Does she realize she just called my daughter not real? Michael rubbed the back of his neck. I've tried to get her to stop, Sarah. She doesn't listen. I didn't answer. My pulse was too loud in my ears. Instead, I moved past him to set my empty coffee cup in the sink, but a sound from the hallway caught my attention, a faint voice, low but carrying just enough for me to catch the words. Marriages like theirs never last. I froze. The voice was unmistakable. Carol's. Michael must have seen the change in my expression because he turned. What is it? I held up a hand, signaling for silence, and stepped lightly toward the kitchen doorway. From there, I could see the sliver of hallway leading to the front door. Carol stood near the coat rack with her cousin, her voice hushed but sharp. She's nice enough, I guess, she said. But let's be honest, marriages like theirs never last. Too many complications when kids from someone else are involved. It's just how it is. Her cousin murmured something I couldn't catch, and Carol gave a small laugh, as though the matter was both obvious and amusing. I stayed hidden, my breath shallow. There it was again, that subtle, cutting dismissal, not just of me, but of my entire marriage. When I stepped back into the kitchen, Michael was watching me, his brows knit. She's still here? He asked. I didn't answer his question. Instead, I said, do you know she's been telling people our marriage won't last? He looked genuinely surprised, but I couldn't tell if it was because he didn't believe it or because he hadn't heard her say it out loud until now. She wouldn't. She just did, I interrupted, my voice trembling more from anger than hurt. At that moment, footsteps approached. It was Rachel, one of Michael's younger cousins, holding an empty dessert plate. She hesitated at the doorway, sensing the tension. I didn't mean to eavesdrop earlier, she said slowly, but if you think what she said tonight was bad, it's been going on for a while. Michael frowned. What do you mean? Rachel shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the hallway to make sure Carol wasn't within earshot. At Aunt Donna's barbecue last month, she told a few people that you, she nodded toward me, were a nice distraction, but that eventually Michael would realize what's best for him. And she trailed off, clearly debating whether to continue. Say it, I urged. Rachel's voice dropped lower. She's been hinting to everyone that you, too much baggage. Her words, not mine. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Michael's face drained of color. Rachel, why didn't you tell me? I thought you knew, she said. Everyone assumed you were just ignoring it. I couldn't decide which stung more, that Carol had been talking about me for months, or that Michael might have been aware and chose silence. My eyes locked on him, searching for any sign of guilt. I didn't know it was this bad, he said, almost defensively. I knew she wasn't thrilled at first, but I thought she'd come around. Come around. I repeated. Michael, she's been running a quiet campaign against me behind my back. He pressed his lips together, the muscle in his jaw twitching. I'll talk to her. No, I said firmly. You've talked to her before, haven't you? And here we are. He didn't respond. Rachel cleared her throat. I should probably go check on the kids, she said, backing toward the hallway. When she was gone, I leaned against the counter, feeling the full weight of everything I'd just learned. This wasn't a single careless remark over dinner. This was a pattern, a deliberate, ongoing effort to undermine me. And it had been happening in rooms I wasn't in, with people who smiled to my face and said nothing. Michael moved toward me, his voice low. Sarah, I don't know what you want me to do right now. I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, I want you to see this for what it is. And I want you to stop pretending it will go away on its own. He swallowed hard but didn't argue. Somewhere down the hall, the front door clicked shut, followed by the muffled sound of Carol's laughter fading into the night. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that lingers after something has been broken. And for the first time that evening, I realized this wasn't about one dinner, or one comment, or even one person. It was about a truth I hadn't wanted to face, one that would change how I saw every interaction from here on out. The faint thud of the front door closing still echoed in my ears, but my mind was already shifting. The conversation in the kitchen hadn't been enough. Words traded behind closed doors would change nothing. I could feel it. If I didn't take this into the open, right now, she'd keep her grip on this house, on my husband, on the story she'd been weaving about me. I straightened from the counter, my heart pounding but steady. "I'll be right back," I told Michael, though I didn't wait for his reply. My feet carried me toward the dining room, the soft hum of lingering conversation drifting closer with each step. The moment I stepped into the room, the chatter faltered. A few relatives looked up, forks pausing mid-y, as though sensing I hadn't returned to refill my glass or clear plate. Carol sat at the far end of the table, her posture relaxed, a faint smirk playing at the corner of her mouth as she chatted with her cousin. I stopped halfway into the room and let the silence settle, heavy and deliberate. "Carol," I said evenly. She turned her head toward me, her smirk widening as if this were just another casual exchange. "Yes, dear." I took a breath, not rushing the moment. "We need to address what you said to my daughter tonight. And we're going to do it right here, in front of everyone." The room went still. Chairs creaked as people shifted, eyes darting between us. Carol gave a small laugh and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, for goodness sake, Sarah. It was just a joke." A few people glanced at each other, their discomfort obvious. The clink of a fork against a plate sounded like a bell in the silence. I kept my gaze locked on hers. "You called my daughter not really family. You told her she should be careful about thinking she belongs here. That isn't a joke, Carol. That's cruelty." Her smirk faltered, but she quickly replaced it with feigned amusement. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Kids forget these things." "No," I cut in, my voice low but sharp enough to slice through her sentence. "Children remember exactly how people make them feel. And you made her feel like she doesn't matter." Someone cleared their throat down the table, but no one spoke up to defend her. Carol leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Honestly, I think you're just too sensitive." "Sensitive?" I repeated, my voice calm but carrying enough to fill the room. "No, protective. That's what a mother does when someone crosses the line with her child. And you crossed it." Her cousin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Michael's aunt reached for her glass, her eyes downcast. The silence had weight now. Everyone was waiting for what would come next. I stepped closer to the table, my hands steady at my sides. "You've been living in my home, Carol, rent-free, eating at my table, sleeping under my roof. And instead of showing even basic respect, you've chosen to undermine me, my marriage, and my daughter." Her lips parted slightly, surprise flickering in her eyes at the bluntness of it. "Well, You have 24 hours, I said clearly, cutting her off again. "Pack your things. Find somewhere else to stay. You will not continue living here." The words landed like a gavel strike. Gasps broke the silence from a couple of relatives. Someone at the far end dropped a fork. Carol's face flushed deep red, a mix of disbelief and humiliation. "You're kicking me out? Over one comment?" I tilted my head slightly. "This isn't about one comment. This is about months of disrespect. Tonight was simply the last straw." She glanced around the table, searching for an ally, but found only averted eyes. Even those who had smiled along with her earlier seemed unwilling to step into the line of fire now. Her voice rose, brittle and sharp. "Michael, Are you really going to let her talk to me like this? Michael had been silent in the doorway, watching. He didn't move closer, but his words were measured when he spoke. Mom, she's right. Things can't keep going like this. Carol's eyes widened at him, betrayal flashing in her expression. So you're siding with her? This isn't about sides, he said quietly. It's about respect. And you've crossed that line too many times. The tension in the room coiled tighter. Carol's breathing quickened, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. She let out a short, incredulous laugh, but it didn't sound like her earlier smirks. It sounded defensive, almost desperate. Well, she said finally, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, if that's how it's going to be, I suppose I'll just go pack right now. No one stopped her. No one even suggested she stay and talk it out. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood. As she moved past me, she muttered, "You'll regret this." I didn't turn my head, didn't let her see any reaction. "What I'll regret," I said, my voice steady, "is if I let my daughter grow up in a home where she thinks it's normal to be treated like she's less than." Carol didn't answer. She disappeared down the hall, her footsteps sharp against the floor. The room remained frozen for a long moment. I could feel every set of eyes on me, but I kept my attention on the table, scanning each face. No one argued. No one defended her. That, more than anything, told me I'd made the right call. Michael finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I think dinner's over." Chairs scraped back slowly. People began gathering their things, murmuring polite goodbyes. A few avoided my gaze entirely, but others, like Rachel, gave me small, almost imperceptible nods. Quiet acknowledgments. When the last of the guests drifted out, I stood in the now empty dining room. The plates were still scattered, half-finished meals abandoned. The air felt lighter, though the echo of the confrontation still lingered. Michael came to stand beside me, his hands in his pockets. "You didn't hold back," he said softly. "No," I replied, my eyes still fixed on the doorway Carol had vanished through. "Not this time." The morning light spilled into the hallway, pale and cool, cutting across the hardwood in long slanted stripes. The house was still except for the muffled thump of footsteps upstairs. I stood in the doorway of the living room, coffee warming my hands, listening to the occasional creak of the stays. Carol appeared at the landing, her expression tight and unreadable. A suitcase rolled behind her, the wheels clicking softly over each step. She didn't look at me as she reached the bottom, adjusting the strap of her purse over her shoulder. I didn't move to help her. I stayed where I was, leaning slightly against the doorframe, letting the distance between us remain. She passed through the hall, the faint scent of her perfume lingering briefly before fading. Michael was at the front door, holding it open. He murmured something I couldn't hear, and she gave a short, clipped reply. Her gaze flicked toward the driveway, toward the waiting car, but never toward me. It was as though the space I occupied had turned invisible overnight. She stepped outside without another word. The suitcase bumped over the threshold, the sound oddly final. From the stairs behind me, a small voice broke the silence. "Is Grandma mad at us?" I turned to see Lily standing barefoot, her hair still tangled from sleep, clutching the sleeve of her pajama top. Her eyes were wide, uncertain. I knelt so we were at eye level. "Grandma's not mad at you," I said softly. "She just needs to be somewhere else right now. Sometimes grown-ups can't be in the same place without making it hard for everyone." She frowned a little, but I didn't do anything. My throat tightened. "I know, sweetheart, and that's why I spoke up. Because you didn't do anything wrong, and you should never feel like you don't belong in your own home." Her face eased, though her eyes still carried the weight of a question she couldn't quite put into words. She nodded slowly, then padded back upstairs, the sound of her steps light against the wood. The door shut quietly as Michael returned. For a moment, we stood in the entryway together, listening to the faint hum of a car engine pulling away. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's quiet," he said, almost surprised by it. It was. The air felt different, looser, as though an invisible rope had been untied. The tension that had been wound into every corner of the house had started to dissolve, leaving a stillness that felt almost fragile. By mid-morning, the house had taken on a different rhythm. The kitchen was filled with the smell of cinnamon toast, the television murmured softly from the living room, and Lily's laughter floated down from upstairs. Every sound felt lighter without the constant undercurrent of someone waiting to criticize. That night, after Lily went to bed, Michael and I sat at the dining table, the same one where everything had come to a head the night before. Half empty mugs of tea sat between us. "You know," he said, tracing a finger along the wood grain, "I think this might be the first Thanksgiving in years where I'm not bracing for an argument." I gave a faint smile. It's strange. Part of me wishes it hadn't come to this, but another part is relieved it finally did. We didn't talk about her again that night. We didn't need to. Months passed, and when November rolled around again, the air held the same crisp bite as the year before, but our plans were nothing like they used to be. There were no long guest lists, no elaborate seating charts meant to keep certain people apart. Instead, the list was short. My sister, Michael's cousin Rachel, two close friends who had always shown up for us, and their kids. I remember standing in the kitchen the morning of Thanksgiving, watching Lily help arrange napkins on the table. She hummed softly to herself, folding each one into a triangle the way I'd shown her. "This is more fun than last year," she announced suddenly. I glanced at her, curious. "Why do you think that?" She shrugged, her smile small but sure. "Everyone here likes being here." The truth of it hit me in a quiet, unexpected way. She was right. There was no undercurrent of sharp glances or whispered comments. No one measuring every word for how it might be twisted. The house felt safe. The smell of roasted turkey and fresh herbs filled the air, mingling with bursts of laughter from the living room where Michael and Rachel were trying to teach the kids a card game. The clink of glasses, the occasional bark of my sister's laugh, the gentle hum of the oven. It was a different kind of noise than the year before. This was warmth without performance. Later, when we sat down to eat, I looked around the table. Lily leaned against my arm, chatting happily with Rachel. My sister was already telling a ridiculous story from her college days, making everyone laugh. There was no pretense, no balancing act, just people who genuinely wanted to be together. After dinner, the kids sprawled out on the rug to play board games, and the adults lingered over pie and coffee. I caught Michael's gaze across the table, and we shared a small, unspoken acknowledgement. This was what it was supposed to feel like. When the last guests left and the house grew quiet again, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the taillights fade down the street. My hands were still warm from washing dishes, my heart from something far less tangible. I thought back to the night everything shifted, the silence in the dining room, the finality in my own voice as I gave Carol those 24 hours. At the time, it had felt like stepping off a ledge without knowing if the ground would be there. But standing here now, I could see the truth. It hadn't been a fall at all. It had been a step forward. I walked into Lily's room before bed, finding her already curled beneath the blankets. She smiled sleepily when I tucked the covers around her. "Thanks for the best Thanksgiving," she murmured, eyes half closed. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "You deserve nothing less," I whispered. When I turned off the light and closed her door, I paused in the hallway. The house was still, but not the kind of stillness that waits for the next storm. This was the stillness of peace, of a home finally belonging to the people who lived in it. And I knew, without a single doubt, that standing up for her, even in front of everyone, had been the most important choice I'd ever made as her mother.